Okay, so today I want to tell you about the huge mess in the VS Code ecosystem. And this is one example what happens if you have a large contribution from a large player like Microsoft. So it's definitely a very, very interesting project. A lot of people are using this IDE, but it's not in open governance, and Microsoft is basically controlling and deciding what's done with this IDE. So let's dive into it. So the first thing is VS Code itself is a desktop application available for Linux, Windows, and macOS, and it's basically written in TypeScript, and it uses a framework to actually make it look like a desktop application. And if you download VS Code, then you will also get some closed source parts of it. The majority is on telemetry, so VS Code is actually watching at you what you do and is then transferring that information to Microsoft. You can, to my knowledge, deactivate it, but it is activated per default. Then, because of this, there was another project created which is called VS Codium. So, like Chrome and Chromium, no? And this is possible because the majority of VS Code is open source, and you can basically build your VS Code from the source and make it available as download just without this telemetry component and some logos. And this actually also means you cannot access the original extension marketplace from Microsoft with it, and you need to have an alternative, but I come to that later. So we have now a way of downloading VS Code as VS Codium for free in a binary build without the tracking component of Microsoft. And in order to install extensions, you cannot use the Microsoft marketplace, but luckily there is another marketplace emerging, and the extension type is VSX, and that's now in open governance of the Eclipse Foundation, and the most relevant extensions are also there. So that's one thing to solve it. But now if you want to enter the web-based IDEs, it's a bit more complicated. So, as you might know, I'm a huge fan of the Jupyter ecosystem, and I'll also create a little episode on the Jupyter ecosystem soon. But now let's stay with the VS Code ecosystem first. So, to make it available as a web application, there was a project created called Theia, and Theia actually is giving you VS Code as a web application, and it's a fork of VS Code, and it's also in the Eclipse Foundation under open governance, and it's tightly connected to Eclipse J, which is basically a system for cloud-based workspaces. So it uses Theia for the web-based VS Code experience there. And recently, Microsoft changed VS Code that it actually can be run as a web application. So they introduced a client server model. And the problem is, Microsoft didn't open source the actual server. Fortunately, some folks reverse engineered this server, and unfortunately, there have been two groups doing it, so we are now stuck with two open source VS Code servers. One is called Open VS Code Server, and the other is called Open Code. And there are different companies behind it, but it's all open source. And yeah, that's why you basically are stuck with a huge mess. So a lot of those things are not in open governance. I think only the VSX stuff is in open governance, and Eclipse J and Eclipse Theia, but all the rest still is controlled by different companies, and that's how it is at the moment. Okay, have fun, all the best. Bye.